good afternoon and a warm welcome. My name is Lirato Mabilisa, and as always, I am never alone. I am with my colleague Nogwazi Dlamini. Also joining me in studio is our sign language interpreter Zanele Mota. A very good afternoon, Nogwazi. How are you today?
A very good afternoon, Lerato, and a very good afternoon to our viewers. I'm doing good on this Thursday afternoon, and welcome to our viewers actually to Home Study, the home learning channel. Home learning has become the new normal, hey?
It has become the new normal, and yes. I think it's going to be the new normal for some time.
For a very, very long period of time. So how does our Thursday look like today, Lerato?
Well, grade 7s, Form 3s and Form 5s, your timetable for today looks like this. From 2 p.m. until 2:30 p.m. we have religious studies for grade 7 learners. And then from 2:30 p.m. until 3 or 8 p.m. is additional maths for Form 3 learners. From 3:08 p.m. until 3:45 p.m. is literature in English for Form 3 learners again. And then from 3:45 p.m. until 4:25 p.m. we have religious education for Form 5 learners. And then the last subject from 4:25 p.m. until 5 p.m. is physics for the Form 5 learners again.
Yes, of course, grade 7s, Form 3s and Form 5s, that's what your day looks like today. And just a reminder that we are live right now on YouTube and on Facebook. And just to say again, if you have any questions, please feel free to use our WhatsApp number. Now to get on with the show, up next is the Religious Education grade 7 lesson with Winnie Dlamini. Lerato will be right back with you after this.
Kumelula ukuthi ligciwane lecorona lisuke kulomunye lingene kulomunye uma sitawusonzelana. Singasita sinciphise kwanza kwalo ngekuthi sikhweshelane. Lokhu kusho ukuthi singachawulani, singathinzani njengokuhagana nje. Tikhweshise ngesigaba lesimitha kusuka kulabanye. Kumcoka kakhulu kuhlala uhlobile nekuthi hlobisa uma uke waphumela kubantu. Ngekubambisana sitakumisa kwanza kwaleli gciwane sibe ngulabaphilile. Eswatini sibambisene kulwa nekwanza kweligciwane lecorona.
Wash hands now. Wash hands now. Wash hands now. Wash hands now. Hand washing is one of the best ways to keep from getting sick and staying healthy all year long.
Welcome back, grade 7s. This is the first subject for today, and it is the first subject for the grade 7s. We are learning religious education with Miss Winnie Dlamini, and the topic for today is sin and salvation. A very good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon, Lerato. How are you?
I'm alright. How are you today?
I'm good.
Okay. So today's topic is sin and salvation. What would you expect the viewer to have learned by the end of the lesson?
Okay, let us start the aim of the lesson. The lesson will help the learner to create awareness and the consequences of sin and the importance of salvation.
Okay, ma'am.
Yes. Okay, let us move on, Lerato. I've got keywords for the lesson. The first word is sin. The next one is salvation, jealousy, envious. Okay? Sin is breaking the laws of God. Sin is breaking the laws of God. And the next one is salvation. Salvation is being saved from sin and its punishment. The third one is jealousy. It is when you worry, someone will take what you have. And the next one is envious. Envious is the emotion of wanting what someone else has. Okay, dear Lena at home, I think you have your exercise book and your RSV Bible, also a pen. Our today's objectives are, by the end of the lesson as a learner, you should be able to describe the origin of sin. Also, you have to state the causes of sin. Then you have to state the consequences of sin or the results of sin. The next one, you have to explain how people are saved. Also, you have to state the benefits of salvation. Okay, dear Lena, now let us move on. In previous lesson, you will remember that you learned about the first sin that was done by the first human beings in the Garden of Eden. Can you remember those human beings, dear Lena? Who were the first people who sinned? Those were Adam and Eve. What sin did they commit? They disobeyed God's command. What was their punishment? God gave them different punishments, but I want us to look at this one. They were driven out of the Garden of Eden. Okay, dear Lena, I want you to have a look at this one. What happens at home when you break a rule? Maybe sometimes you are punished by your parents or your guardian. Our today's lesson is about sin and salvation. Okay, let us look here, dear Lena. What is sin? Sin is breaking the laws of God. What are the laws of God? The laws of God are the 10 commandments that God gave to Moses at Mount Sinai. We can find that, dear Lena, in Exodus 20, verse 3. The laws guide people's behavior. The laws help people to maintain good relationship with God and other human beings. If you break these laws, dear Lena, you are sinning. Now let us look at the origin of sin, dear Lena. You will remember that we read Genesis 3, verse 6 to 7. It records the origin of sin among human beings. You will remember that both Adam and Eve, after being deceived by the serpent, they disobeyed God's command by eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden. So we can say that that is the origin of sin. It originated in the Garden of Eden. Thus, Christians believe this is the origin of sin, which has been part of their lives to this very day. Okay, let us look at this picture, dear Lena. As we can see here, I've got a picture which is an example of a picture of Adam and Eve. Okay, dear Lena, Eve ate the fruit and gave it to Adam. And our topic says here, the serpent deceived Eve and Adam. Okay, let us now look at the causes of sin. What causes sin? It can be anger, it can be hatred, gossiping, jealousy, envious behavior, and many more. Okay, dear Lena, let us look at this picture. This picture here, it's an example of a picture of Cain and Abel. Cain, here is Cain. Cain killed Abel. He was jealous and angry to his brother. He was angry. And you can see this young girl here, he's angry. If you are angry, dear Lena, you can do anything which can cause you to fall into sin. Okay, dear Lena, let us look at the consequences of sin. There are results of sinning. The results are guilt and shame. You will remember, dear Lena, that in Genesis 3 verse 8, we read about Adam and Eve. After they've sinned, they hid from God. Also, death. God said Adam will now return to the earth where he was taken. It was because they've sinned against God. Also, dear Lena, if we read Romans chapter 6 verse 23, it says, for the wages of sin is death. Another result of sin or consequence of sin is it damages the relationship with God, our relationship with God. Okay, when we look at Genesis 3 verse 8, Adam and Eve hid from God. Now the relationship was broken. Okay, dear Lena. Also, another result is lack of peace in one's life. Another one is eternal suffering in hell. You can look at this verse, dear Lena, at Luke 16 verse 24. Okay, dear Lena, now I'm having a picture here. It's an example of a man. This man has sinned against God. Now there is a separation here. In between them is sin. And here is God. Now there is a separation between man and God. This man here is lonely. Is not happy, and he eventually is going to die, and he will die, have eternal death. Why? Because he is separated from God. Okay, dear Lena, let us look at salvation now. We've talked about sin. Now let us look at salvation. What is salvation? Salvation is being saved from sin and its punishment. Christians believe that Jesus Christ came to save people from eternal death through his teachings, death, and resurrection. Christians believe that Jesus Christ came to save people from eternal death through his teachings, death, and resurrection. How are people then saved? How are people saved? The Bible teaches that a person will be saved from sin and its punishment if he or she feels sorry for sinning. One, if you feel sorry for sinning, believe in their heart, they repent, then they confess that Jesus is Lord. After that, that person is being baptized in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. That person has to remain faithful. This is how people can be saved. Let us look at this pyramid, dear Lena. These are the steps of salvation. When we are talking about steps you have to take to salvation, you look at the order. First of all, number one, it's at the bottom, it's you believe. After you believe, you repent. After you repent, you confess. After confessing, you become baptized. And then eventually you remain faithful to God. Those are the 5 steps of salvation. It's believe, repent, you confess, you become baptized, and then you remain faithful. I think you have seen that, dear learner. Okay, dear learner, I've got a picture here. It is an example of baptism. If you want to be saved from sin, you go all those steps, you believe, you repent, you confess, then you become baptized. This is an example of a person being baptized. Also, there are benefits of salvation. You benefit from being saved from sin and its punishment. What are those benefits? After being saved, you have benefits which involve what? Restoration of your relationship with God. Also, you have peace at heart and living peacefully with other people. Another benefit is that you will receive eternal life after death in heaven. Although you are going to die, but you will receive eternal life after death. Okay, dear learner, let us look at this biblical verse of salvation. It is found in John 3 verse 16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes, let me circle the word believes, in him, should not perish, but have eternal life. Simply, it means that we have to believe in Jesus Christ so that we can be saved from our sins. Okay, dear learner, let us look at this picture of salvation. In this picture, on this side, it shows people. And here is God. In order to receive the mercy of God, we have to believe in who? In Jesus Christ. And now Jesus Christ is like a bridge for us to be saved from our sins and from sin and its punishment. After you have received Jesus Christ, automatically you are going to be saved from sin, and you will be we will be children of God. Okay, dear learner, I think we have seen this picture of salvation. Okay, dear learner, it's time for assessment. My first question here, you can write the questions down. My first question is, what is sin? What is sin? It's 1 mark. Question number 2, who were the first people to sin? Who were the first people to sin? 2 marks. Question number 3, how can one be saved from sin? Here, can you write the steps of salvation? I want you to write the steps of salvation, and it's 5 marks. Question number 4, it's our evaluation question as usually. Do you think people who continue to sin are justified? Do you think people who continue to sin are justified? Give reasons for your answer. I think we have written the questions down, dear learner. Now let us look at our answers. Our first question was, what is sin? Sin is breaking the laws of God. Sin is breaking the laws of God. Question number 2. Who were the first people to sin? Who were the first people to sin? Our answer is Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve. Question number 3. How can one be saved from sin and how can one be saved from sin? You have to write the 5 steps of salvation. Here are the steps. You believe in your heart. You repent. You confess that Jesus is Lord. Be baptized in the name of the Father, the Son, and Holy Spirit. Then you have to remain faithful. Question number 4. Do you think people who continue to sin are justified? Give reasons for your answer. Our question says, do you think people who continue to sin are justified? You give reasons for your answer. And our answer here, dear Lena, one can say yes. I want you to then go back to the question and look how the question was phrased. Yes, people who continue to sin are justified. Why? Because they are humans and the devil keeps tempting people. And one can say no. People who continue to sin are not. Now you are going to write not because you have used no. No, people who continue to sin are not justified because the word of God is preached to them so that they could repent from their sins. Those are the answers to the questions, dear Lena. Okay, now let us look at our conclusion today. From this lesson, we've learned how Adam and Eve led people to sin. We've learned that anger, jealousy, hate, and hatred are some of the causes of sin, although there are other causes of sin. But we have just mentioned a few: anger, jealousy, hatred. We've also learned that there are results or consequences for all the sins we commit. Lastly, we've learned that people can be saved from sin and its punishment. Okay, dear Lena, unfortunately, that's the end of our lesson today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Winnie, for being with us today. That was a very interesting lesson. But before you leave, your grade 7s have questions for you. And one says, please repeat the definition of the word salvation. And then one is asking for the definitions of the keywords. And then the last question is, please repeat the benefits of salvation.
Okay, Lerato. Let me repeat the
keywords.
The keywords.
Yes.
Okay. The keywords is sin, salvation, jealousy, and envious. And I've said sin is breaking the laws of God. The next one is salvation. Salvation is being saved from sin and its punishment. The third one is jealousy. When person is jealousy, we say it is when you worry someone will take what you have. Also envious. It is the emotion of wanting what someone else has. Then What's the next question, Lerato?
The next question is the benefits of salvation.
The benefits of salvation.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Lerato. The benefits of salvation. Let us look at the benefits of salvation. I've said, after being saved from sin, you have benefits, which may involve the following. It is the restoration. It is restoration of your relationship with God. Now you will have a relationship with God again. Another one is having peace at heart. Now you have peace at heart. Why? Because you are no longer sinning. Now you are saved from sin. You live peacefully with others. Why? Because you are no longer angry with people. You are no longer having jealousy. You are no longer having greed. You live peacefully with other people. Also, you receive eternal life after death in heaven. Although you can die, after that you will receive eternal life in heaven. That's all, Relad.
Yes, ma'am. That was a very informative lesson. Thank you very much for being with us today. We're hoping that you're going to come again next time.
Thank you, Lerato.
Okay. Without wasting time, my colleague Nogwazi Dlamini will be back with the next Form 3 subject. So Form 3s do not go anywhere. Nogwazi will be back after the infomercial.
Ligciwane le-corona lincane kakhulu, angeke ulibone ngemehlo enyama. Kuze liphile lidinga kunamathela kubantu. Leli gciwane lingena melula emphumulweni, emlonyeni kanye nasemehlweni. Ligciwane le-corona alikhethi, lingesuka kithi thine bantfwana liye kubatali kanye nabothishela. Lisengesuka kubo litekithi. Indlela yekulimisa leli gciwane kulivimba kuthi lisuke kulomunye liye kulomunye. Uma umuntu athimula noma akhwehlela, leli gciwane lihamba kanye nalamathonsi laphuma kuloyo muntu. Uma uthinta lapho athimulele noma akhwehlelele khona, uyalibutha leli gciwane. Uma ke uthinta impumulo, umlomo noma emehlo, livele lingene kuwe. Ngakho-ke umthetho wokuqala, umthetho lomkhulu, geza tandla takho ngemanti lagijimako nangensipho njalo njalo. Uma uthimula, thimulela engcoseni yakho. Ungaqala ufake imino emphumulweni. Dikhweshise kulabanye bantfu ngesigaba lesiyimitha. Kepha lokusebenta kangcono kakhulu, uhlale ekhaya. Uma sihlala emakhaya, leli gciwane alikhoni kuhamba.
Eswatini sibambisene kulwa nekwanza kweligciwane le-corona.
COVID-19 corona. COVID-19 corona. COVID-19 corona. COVID-19 corona. COVID-19 corona. COVID-19 corona. Let's stand together.
Join hands.
Fight against corona.
Let's stand
together.
Join hands.
Fight against corona.
COVID-19
corona.
COVID-19
corona.
Maswati, let's fight COVID-19 by making a meter away from each other.
COVID-19 corona.
Wash your hands with soap and running water frequently to prevent COVID-19.
Avoid touching eyes, nose, mouth, shaking hands to prevent COVID-19. Are you coughing? Are you sneezing or having headache? Make sure that you quickly go to the hospital. COVID-19 Corona. COVID-19 Corona.
Welcome back to our viewers, and a very good afternoon if you have just joined us. This is Home Study on Eswatini TV. My name is Nogwazi Dlamini, and right now we are doing additional mathematics for the Form 3s. And already joining me in the studio is the additional mathematics teacher, Sitembiso Dlamini. Also joining me in the studio are our sign language interpreters, Tobile Fagudze and Linda Mamba. How are you doing, Sitembiso, this afternoon?
Hey, I'm okay, Nogwazi. Thank you for asking.
Thank you for asking me how I'm doing. I'm doing good, by the way. Today we're doing functions, I understand.
Yeah, we'll be doing functions.
What are you expecting your Form 3 learner to have learned by the end of the lesson?
Yeah, we expect a learner to be able to evaluate a function and also to relate quadratic mappings now to a function.
Okay.
So we'll also be using that in the context now of an exam situation now. So we'll be helping them, guiding them with how they are going to treat this in an exam situation.
All right, Form 3s, I hope you are ready for your lesson. And of course, another reminder that we are live on YouTube and on Facebook. And if you have any questions, please feel free to use our WhatsApp number. Sitembiso, I think you may begin with your lesson.
Thank you very much. As I've mentioned here, the main objective today, it is to evaluate a function now. That is, what we mean by that, we'll be finding the domain, and another word for domain is what we call the input, and then also the range, and then another word for range is what we call output. So most importantly, we want to relate a quadratic mapping now to what we call a function. So we want to relate a quadratic mapping to a function, and then also we want to apply quadratic functions now in apply functions in quadratic graphs. So that's what we'll be doing today. So we moving on now. We want to introduce the lesson. We want to say we want to define what a function is. So we are saying a function, that is a function, is a mapping. So a function is a mapping, and then the function now maps a set of numbers, which we call now inputs, into another set of numbers, which we call outputs. So the input of a function is called what? It is called a domain, and the output set is called what? Is called a range, as mentioned. So in simple terms, now we are saying a function is more like a job done to the input represented by x to get an output. The next thing we want to discuss is what we call a function notation now, which is going to help us now to say in mathematics, when you see function, what is it that you need to see. So we're going to use now examples to describe the notation. So the first example there is this function here, and then this is how we read it. It's f of x. So this part here is f of x is equal to 5x plus 2. So that's how we read a function. So it's f of x is equal to 5x plus 2. And then now there's this second notation here. It is also a function now, same function. And then this is how we read it. We say f is such that, the colon, the semicolon there is such that f is such that x is mapped. So the arrow is representing mapped, is mapped onto 5x plus 2, like that. So those are the two ways in which we represent a function. Now the first one, we said it is f of x is equal to 5x plus 2, and then the other one, f is such that x is mapped onto 5x plus 2. So another important thing about functions is that they are represented by the small letter. Most of the time we use f now from the word function. And then But it is also very important now to mention that other letters can be used to represent the function. For instance, this one here, it is read g of x here, and then this one is read h of z. Now with this one h of z, we are saying now it is not only x that can be used as a variable, but we can also use all the other letters here. Like in this example here, it is h of z, where z is the variable. So it's very, very important that we are flexible on that one, so that we are able to see that this is a function. It is not all the time that we are going to be having f and then x as the variable. Let us get into evaluating a function. To find the value of a function now, we substitute the given value of the variable. You can either, you can either be given a specific input. You can be given a specific input to get an output, or specific output to get an input. So you must be able to move forward and also be able to move back. Let us look at an example now to illustrate what I am trying to say. Now we are given this here, function here, f of x is equal to 2x plus 5. Now we are to find f of 2. What does this mean? To find f of 2, I'm sure you're asking yourself that. Now it means the function is in terms of x, where x has been multiplied by 2 and then 5 has been added. So finding f of 2 means finding, it means we now find the output where x is equal to 2. What's the meaning of that? We are going to replace x with a given number and then calculate the function. Like here now in this example, that is f of x, that is the function. Where there is x, we are going to substitute now 2, because 2 is the input. So that now we are going to have f of 2 there. So this is now f of 2, I've substituted 2, and then this is going to be 2 times 2. I'm sure you remember that the brackets now, they mean that we are multiplying these 2. So this is 2 times 2 plus 5. And then 2 times 2 is 4. And then 4 plus 5 here is going to give us 9. So that now f of 2 is going to be 9, equal to 9. So we have evaluated the function now when we are given that the input is 2 for this particular case. Let us move forward now and look at a question now where we are using an examination situation now. Most of you now may have met this when they are trying to revise now, to say most of the time the questions are going to be in this fashion, and then now we are going to guide you on how you go about answering that. You are given two functions here. The first function is f of x is equal to 7 minus 2x, and then the second function is g of x is equal to 15. Now we are told that that is for all values of x. That's very important. Now the first one now, Roman 1, you are to find f of negative 3. So that means we want to find the range. We want to find the range if the domain is negative 3. That is, what is the range when the domain is negative 3? And doing that, as we discussed, we are saying now in place of x, we are going to put negative 3. Hence, we are going to have f of negative 3 there. And then in the function, because it's 7, remember it is 7 minus 2x. And then here, this is your x, we put negative 3. Now we evaluate 7 minus and minus 3, it's going to give us positive 6 there. And then 7 plus 6 is going to give us 13. So that now f of 3 is equal to 13. So if the domain is negative 3, the range is going to be 13 as shown there. The next part there, we are to find g of 0. G of 0. And then now, remember the function, it is g of x is equal to 15. Now what we notice now is that on the right hand side of the equal sign, there's only 15 there. It is just a constant. The output is constant. It does not depend on the value of x. That is, no matter what value of x you put now into this function now, the 15 is not going to change because there's no x on the right hand side. So we say here the output is constant, does not depend on x, so that g of 0 is equal to 15. Even if you were to say g of 10, you are going to get 15. G of any number is going to give us 15 because it is constant. And then the last part that we are to attempt there, 3 times the function f of x. Now the meaning of this, it means you are multiplying the function f of x by 3. You are multiplying the function f of x by 3. And then this is what we are going to do, 3 times f of x. And then this is going to be 3 here times this is part that is in brackets here is the function f of x, which is 7 minus 2. So you multiply that by 3, and then now we have got the brackets. Now 3 times 7 is going to give us 21, and 3 times this minus 2x is going to give us minus 2x. So that now 3 times f of x is going to give us 21 minus 6x. So I'm sure you are still following on how we go about doing this. Let us look at another example, which is also, in fact, it's not another example. We are still continuing with this part now to say in the function now, find the value of x if f of x is equal to, if f of x there is equal to g of x. So the same functions that we're doing. Now, what we notice here is that the two functions are equated. So we want to find the value of the domain, that is the value of x, where the two ranges are equal. So we want to find the value of x that that will be your input in both of these functions now, because we are equating them to find the range there when you input that x now in the two functions. So we are going to start by equating the two functions, and then we are going to substitute, because f of x is 7 minus 2x. We put it on the left hand side there, and then g of x, remember, it is 15. So we have equated the two functions, and then now what we are seeing here is what we call a linear equation, which we solve to find x. And then now with this linear function, now the intention now is to isolate x. So we are going to subtract 7 both sides here. This is the step we've done. We have subtracted 7. If you subtract 7 on the left hand side, you are going to be left with negative 2x, and then 15 minus 7 on the right hand side is going to give us 8. And then now you move forward, because the intention is to isolate x, and then you divide. You are going to divide by negative 2 both sides. When you do that, the right hand side will be left with x, and then the left hand side will be x, and then the right hand side will be negative 4. That is to say, whenever the input is negative 4, then the two functions are going to be equal. And then we can even test that here, because in the function f of x, if you substitute negative 4, because it is 7, 2 times negative 4, 2 times here, if you say 2 times negative 4, there you are going to get, because it's negative, negative and negative are going to give us positive. So this is what we are going to have there. So it's going to be 7 plus 8. It's going to be 7 plus 8, because it's going to be negative 2 times negative 4. And then if you do that, you're going to get 15 there. And then remember, g of x, we said it is 15, doesn't change. And then at that point, you can see that the left-hand side, the function f of x is equal to g of x, because they are both 15 when x is equal to negative 4. Now let's look at another example. Still, we are using an exam situation now to try and help you on how you answer such questions. Now, this example here, you are given that f of x, the function f of x, is equal to 5x minus 3 all over 6. And then now we need to evaluate f of 0, and then also the second part now to find the value, to calculate the value of x if f of x is equal to 2. So let's see how we go about doing that. Let's see how we go about. Now the first part here, we are to find f of 0. It means in the function now, where there is x now, our input is going to be 0 now. And when you do that now in the function now, f of 0 is equal to 5. So because our function is 5x minus 3 all over 6, it means where there is x, there is going to be 5 times 0 minus 3 in the numerator all over 6. And then when you do that, this part here, all over, it's going to be this part there. We have substituted the part f of 0. So f of 0 is minus 3 all over 6. And then remember we said the brackets here representing multiplication. So it is going to be 5 times 0, which gives us 0 there. Hence we'll be left with negative 3 there. And then in the denominator we've got 6. And then simplifying this fraction here, you are going to have negative a half there, or negative 1 over 2. So we have evaluated the function f of 0. So it means where there is x, we substituted 0. And then now we're moving on now to the second part now. The second part, we want to find the domain given the range as 2. As we said here, find the value of x if f of x is equal to 2. So it means we are going to equate now the function f of x to 2, like we have done here. So this is 5x minus 3 all over 6 is equal to 2. So again, this is what? An equation which we must solve for x. So equating, that way we have equated. And then the next thing now, we need to remove this denominator, which is 6 there. And then to remove the denominator, you multiply both sides. Multiply both sides by 6. We multiply both sides by 6. And if you do that, the left hand side, the 6 and 6 are going to cancel, and then you'll be left with 5x minus 2. And then on the right hand side, 2 times 6 is 12. And then you continue now, because the intention is to isolate x now. You are going to add 3. You do that by adding 3 both sides. If you add 3, this side minus 3 and plus 3 are going to give us 0. Hence we'll be left with 5x. And then on the right hand side, 12 plus 3 is going to give us 15. And then now you divide by 5 both sides, because you want to isolate x. Dividing by 5 both sides, here we'll be left with x, and then 15 divided by 5 is going to give us 3, so that now x is equal to 3. It means therefore the domain, when x is equal to 3, then the output is going to be 2, meaning the range is going to be 2. Let us move on and then look now a link between functions now and what we call quadratic mappings. Quadratic mappings, what are they? Maybe you're asking yourself that. They are still functions now where instead of f of x, we have y. E.g., let's say you are given the function here, f of x is equal to x squared minus 2x plus 3. This can be written as y is equal to x squared minus 2x plus 3. You can see where there was the symbol f of x, now we put y. And then these are quadratics because the highest power of x is 2. So graph of quadratic mappings now, remember the other time when we learned, we know they are parabola, which is U-shaped, like that. So that now, most of the time when we are solving quadratic equations now, normally you are given an instruction that use a graph to solve quadratic equations. So it's very, very important that you do not use an alternative method, but use the graph, so that you do not lose a lot of marks. So, and also it is very important that you must have evidence of using the graph. So we must see where you are manipulating now, where you have used the graph to solve those quadratic equations. So it's very important. Let us move on now and look at an example now, where we are now linking functions and mappings. You are to draw the graph of this one now, x squared minus y is equal to x squared minus x minus 2 for values of x ranging from -1 to +4. Now it says in order to draw the graph, we need a table of the coordinates. That's very important. So we are going to use functions now to find the coordinates. So we are going to use now our knowledge of functions to find. So we are going to let y to be the function f of x. Hence now we are changing the graph there. It was saying y, we write it as f of x now, meaning f of x is equal to x squared minus x minus 2. And then now what's very important also to find the coordinates, the values of x become what? The input. And remember the input we say it is still the domain of the function, and then the corresponding values of y become the output, and the output is the range. So it is also very important to be able to interchange the words domain, input, output, range, and so on. So they mean the same thing. So we are going to demonstrate now, because remember, for us to draw the graph, we need coordinates. So we are going to demonstrate how we can use functions now to find the points. So we are going to use the first point, because we are told that the values of x, they range, the values of x are ranging, sorry, the values of x range from -3 to +4. So we shall use the first point, which is -3, because that's where you start now, to demonstrate how we find the point, the coordinates using functions. It means, therefore, we are going to find, because x is the input in this function, so we are going to put now f of 3. We are going to evaluate f of -3, and then it means where there is x, we are going to put -3. Hence here, we have put -3 in place of x. So we are going to have -3 square minus -3 minus 2, and -3 square is going to give us positive 9, and then -3 is going to give us +3 minus 2 there, and then if you simplify that, you are going to get that it is 10, meaning f of -3 is going to give us 10. Hence the coordinate of the first point are going to be -3, 10. So the coordinates are in the function input, output. So the x is the input, and then the y is the output. So the first point is going to be -3, 10. So this is what you are going to do in all the points now, because you consider integer values of x now from -3 to +4. And then now we are going to have the table there. It means now to generate this table, for the value of x to be -2, you put it in the function, you get 4. Value of -1, you get 0 as the output. Input 0, output -2, and so on and so forth, up to the last point, which is +4, where we are going to get the output to be 10. And then now, once you have this, now you have got the table of the coordinates that you use to draw the graph. Hence now we discovered that we substitute values of x in the function. F of x is equal to x squared minus x minus 2 to get the values of y. That is the corresponding value of y. And then now these are the coordinates that we need for what? For plotting our graph. Now let's move on now to the point where now we want to draw the graph. In fact, we don't say plotting the graph, but plotting the points. Okay, I hope you note that. So drawing the curve now, these are very, very important points that you need to know when you're drawing a graph. Before drawing a graph now, most of the time you are guided now with what you call the scale here. We've got what we call now the SPC format here, where S stands for scale. Now, what is very important about the scale, you must correctly label the axis. Okay, so it means you need to use the correct scale. Now, normally the scale is going to be what we call now uniform numbering. Uniform numbering is the same as use a regular scale for each axis. Normally you are guided on that one. So make sure you use the correct scale for the axis. Now you are normally given a scale for the x-axis and then a scale for the y-axis. So pay attention to that detail. And then the next part now, P stands for plotting. Plotting all the points correctly. Now you have got the coordinates, you need to plot the points now in your graph. And then we normally use crosses, because when you are plotting, we are saying the points must be visible, so that when we are drawing the curve, we see the evidence that these were the points that you are joining. So you use a cross, because a cross is going to have the point where the two lines are crossing, where you see that this is where the curve should pass through. And then the last part, C, stands for the curve. The curve must be smooth through all the points. And then now for quadratic graphs, now the curve we use a free hand, so you don't join them using a ruler. So let's get now into the business now of drawing the curve. The first thing now, remember we said use a regular scale. what do we mean by regular scale now? We mean the intervals are equal in each axis. Now, if we were to look here, there is a scale now for the y-axis. When we are moving up, there is a scale here. Here it says 1 centimeter represents 1 unit. It means now for every centimeter that is a unit, and from here you can see it's 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, up to 10, like that. And then it is regular. It means now if you move from each unit there to the next, same difference. So the difference is 1 here. 1 centimeter represents a unit. So that's very important, and it is regular. And then also for the horizontal axis now, there is now another scale now where 2 centimeters now represent a unit. So it means now for every 2 centimeters, that's a unit. So here we have got 1 is there, 2 is there. So you can see the two scales now, they are not the same now for the axis. It means therefore pay attention. Now, but what was very important for us is that the scale for each axis is regular. The horizontal one is 1, 2, 3, 4, and then negative 1, 2. So it is regular, it is not jumbled. The numbers are not jumbled, but they are uniform. So that's very important for the scale. And then the next part, it is now plotting the points. Remember, we said we need the coordinates, and these are the coordinates that we are going to use now to plot our points here. That we took from the table. So that now for the point negative 310, this is the point negative 2, 4, that's the point, and negative 1, 0, that's the point, and then the point negative 1, negative 2, and then 2, 0, that's the point, and then 3, 4, that's the point, and then 4, 10, that's the point. Now what you notice here, we used crosses now to have to plot these points. So it's very important. Now everything that you are going to do is going to depend on these points. Now it is very, very important, because if the points are wrong, it follows that the curve that you'll be plotting is also wrong. So that is, if you are losing marks in plotting the points, you are also going to lose them in joining the points, because you are joining something that is not there. So it's very important that you pay special attention. And also now, for just a tip for the quadratic graph now, you must see the points. From the points you can see a pattern of a quadratic curve from there. So if one point is somehow wrongly plotted, that is going to show you now, it's going to be misplaced now in your graph. For instance, if you were to have a point now, just one point falling in there, it is telling you now that this point is not following the pattern. Now the points have got a pattern that we can see from this drawing here. Now let's move on now in joining the points now with a very smooth curve. Since you'll be using a free hand now, it's very, very important that the trick, they say you always pull the pencil so that it is in your control, because if you are pushing it, then it is out of your control. Then you're not going to have a smooth curve. And remember, we said you don't join the points using a straight edge or a ruler for most of our cases. So it's very important that you use a smooth curve, because all other things that you are going to do now are going to depend on the accuracy of this graph. For instance, we normally use it to solve quadratic equations. Now, if the graph is wrong, it means therefore when we are trying to solve now, your points are going to be wrong. So it means your solutions will be wrong. Now we've come to a point where now we need to do a summary of our lesson. We said when evaluating functions, replace the variable with the given number and then calculate. That is what we do when we're evaluating a function. And then we also said functions work like equations. You take an x value that is in the domain and find a y value, which is the range, just like you do when you are calculating coordinates in a graph. And then the last thing that we discovered was that quadratic mappings are also functions. So we use functions to plot the quadratic curve. That is very important that you find the link between the two. Sometimes the notation that is used there is going to guide you that now, okay, this is now a function. I can use a function now to plot this graph. I hope you are able to follow that, and hopefully you'll be able to attempt all the questions that involve functions and also apply them in cases of quadratic mappings.
Thank you very much, Stembiso, for your lesson. And maybe just before we leave, just one question from one of your students. Please repeat the function notation. That's what.
Okay, the function notation.
Yes.
Let's get there. Function notation. Okay, yeah, this is the part where we're discussing function notation. Now, thank you very much for the learner who is following. We said there are two ways of writing a function. The first one here, and then this is how we read it. We read the function. We say f of x, this part here is f of x is equal to 5x plus 2. That's how we read a function, okay? So the f and the brackets, we read it as f of x, and then equals to this function that is on the right hand side. So another one, we said we're going to use this notation there, and then this notation there, we are saying we have got the f. F stands for the function. So f, then the semicolon here stands for such that. So that when we are reading f is such that x, and then we say the arrow stands for is mapped onto. So here we read f is such that x is mapped onto 5x plus 2. So that is the notation that we used. And then we said we are not confined to the letter f and then the variable x here. We need all the letters. We are spoiled with all the letters of the alphabet. We can use them to represent any function. I made an example here. Sometimes we are going to use g. Sometimes we can have the function as h of z now. And then we say it here for this particular case here, the name of the function is h, and then the variable in the function is z. Okay, so that we can do that quickly. Like we can take this same function here and write it using the h there. So you can say it is h of z is equal to what? 5z plus 2. You can see from there now that instead of using x, we used z because it is our function, and then the function we had named it as f there, but it's now h. So that's how you do it. I hope the learner is clear now.
I hope the learner has been answered in that regard. Thank you very much, Stembiso, for your lesson, and we're hoping to see you again soon.
Oh, thank you very much. It's always my pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. Form 3s, stay tuned for the second lesson of the day for you guys. Lerato will be right back with the literature in English teacher right after this.
Akili, 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 akili. Will you wash your hands with me? I want to wash my hands with you. Come on, I will show you what to do. Wash your hands in clean water. Wash your hands, wet them with the water. Wash your hands, now add some soap. Scrub your hands in the soap and water. Scrub above and below between the fingers too. Scrub under your nails and scrub a dub-a-doo. Rinse your hands in water. Rinse them clean, rinse away the soap. Dry your hands and go.
Akili, why do we wash our hands?
To wash away the germs.
Akili, what are germs?
They're like tiny little bugs on your hands, and they can make you sick.
But I don't see any germs on my hand.
That's because they're so tiny that you can't even see them.
Oh wow! I want to wash the germs away. Will you wash your hands with me, Akili?
Of course! Wash your hands in clean water. Wash your hands, wet them with the water. Wash your hands, now add some soap. Scrub your hands in the soap and water. Scrub above and below between the fingers too. Scrub scrub under your nails and scrub-a-dub-a-doo. Rinse your hands, rinse your hands, rinse your hands in water. Rinse them clean, rinse away the soap. Dry your hands, dry your hands, dry your hands and go.
Great job, Haruma! Can you tell me the 4 things we did to wash our hands? I can try.
1.
Wash our hands with water.
2.
Put soap on our hands.
3.
Scrub, scrub, scrub our hands all over.
4.
Rinse our hands clean with water.
That's right! You got it! Wash your hands, wash your hands, wash the germs away.
Welcome back from threes. This is the third subject of the day and the last subject for you guys. We are doing literature in English with Tebenguni Ngumalo, and the topic is analyzing a poem. A very good afternoon, ma'am.
Afternoon, Lerato.
How are you today?
I am good.
Okay. So today's topic is the bus conductor. Am I correct?
You're right.
Okay. What would you expect the viewer to have learned by the end of the lesson?
It's just to take them through how to analyze a short story and how to tackle a question from when attempting a question on a short story.
Oh, okay. I had
Yes.
said analyzing a poem. It's actually analyzing a short story.
Short story.
Okay.
Yes.
Without wasting time, you may begin your lesson.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, learners at home. So today we will be looking at prose, specifically short stories, and we will analyze the story, The Bus Conductor, written by Velaphi Mamba. We will start with looking at the aims of the lesson, which the aim is to equip you learners with skills needed in approaching prose. Prose, as I hope you remember, covers novels and short stories. For today's lesson, we will be looking at short stories from the anthology Africa Kills Her Son. Our lesson objectives are as follows. Learners should be able to understand the plot of the story, write the names of characters and characterization, respond to a traditional essay question, and write a model response of the question. Let us move on then to the plot summary. I hope you remember that plot. When we talk about plot, we are talking about the events, the sequence of events in a story. So the plot for the story, The Bus Conductor, is as follows. It's quite lengthy. I hope you'll manage to follow. So the story is about a young girl. The story is about a young girl who is orphaned and faces life with great resilience in the face of many overwhelming odds. She is determined to keep her promise to her father, and this does not come easy. The story begins by describing a long, dusty, dirt road that Hlengiwe, so Hlengiwe is our main character, has to walk every day to school. She has been doing this for the past 4 years. The journey is not only tiresome, it also brings with it her greatest adversary by the name of Mabegzo. Mabegzo is another character that I want you to pay attention to. Mabegzo, a suitor and well-known self-absorbed womanizer. He portrays himself as a lifesaver to Hlengiwe by promising to rescue her from all her problems. For the past 3 years, Her suitor has been proposing love to her and promising not only to take care of her, but her siblings too. Although this is tempting, her father's advice, that is Hlengiwe's father's advice, keeps lingering at the back of her mind. Her father's last words and wishes for her was that she waits. She waits until she is old enough to choose a man that she would marry, and that she should know his HIV status. Hlengiwe also goes through an awful bullying from her peers at school, who would buy themselves goodies from the tuck shop and not share with her because they felt she was a fool not to date Mabegzo. She, on the other hand, relied on the food served at school. One fateful day, on her way home, she was met with a terrible ordeal. After seeing that Mabegzo was relentless on her pursuit, she opted to use a different route back home from school. On this day, Mabegzo decided to search for her by foot and met her on a footpath that ran parallel to the main road. This is when the unthinkable happened. Mabegzo forced himself on her. But by God's grace, she managed to escape and ran home as fast as she could. When she got home, she bolted the door shut in the small hut she shared with her young brothers. She could not sleep that night, fearful that Mabegzo would come and force his way in. The rain did not make things better, so it was pouring outside. After some time, Hlengiwe learned that Mabegzo was struck by lightning on the day he attempted to sexually assault her. She also learned that Mabegzo had contracted pneumonia on the day, and it was rumored that he was HIV positive. Hlengiwe passed with flying colors and was admitted at the University of Swaziland. So that is the summary, the plot summary for the story, The Bus Conductor. I hope you remember it now. So we move on to character and characterization. Remember that characters are the people in the story. So in the story we have two main characters. By main, I mean people that feature most of the time. There are two. And then the other characters are not very prominent in the story. So we have Hlengiwe's Konze, who is the main character. And then we have Peggy, or Mabegzo, her suitor. And then we have Jabulani Konze, who is one of Hlengiwe's brothers. The other one, the name is not mentioned. Then we have Hlengiwe's friends. And we have Miss Mabuza, Hlengiwe's teacher. She's the one who used to offer her some piece jobs so that she can have some money for school. Then we have Hlengiwe's father. Hlengiwe's father only features in the story through Hlengiwe's thoughts. He doesn't say much, but through Hlengiwe's thoughts, we get to know about him. So characterization, when we talk about characterization, we mean when we start looking at the character's personality. I will only focus on Hlengiwe and Peggy, or Mabegzo. So Hlengiwe, she is strong-willed. That's one thing we can say about her. She is a fighter. She is focused. She is disciplined. What I want you to do is take these characteristics or the personality that I've mentioned and try and look for examples that support this claim that I've made, that she is strong-willed, she's a fighter, she's focused, she's disciplined. Take some time to look at examples in the story that support this. Then Mabegzo, on the other hand, he is selfish. He's a womanizer. He is arrogant and he is stubborn. Again, I want you to give yourself some time to look at the personality traits that I have mentioned here of Mabegzo and try and get examples in the story that support that Mabegzo is indeed the way I have described him here. So why do we need to learn or know about characterization? Some of the questions that you will attempt need you to have a good idea of how the characters are like. So questions such as, what makes Hlengiwe an admirable character? You need to know Hlengiwe's character in order to respond to such a question. Again, what makes Mabegzo such a dislikable character? Again, you need to know Mabegzo's character and be able to support the claim that you will make about him. So you really need to know the character before you can attempt such questions. So characterization is really important when attempting questions. Also, the plot summary, the events, the way the events unfold in the story are also important. I hope you are enjoying the lesson as we move on. Now we will respond to a traditional question. The question is, how does the writer make us to sympathize with Hlengiwe? How does the writer make us to sympathize with Hlengiwe? The word sympathize means to feel pity or have pity for or feel sorry for somebody. So here are a few points that I have picked in the story that make us sympathize with Hlengiwe. Firstly, she had to walk a long distance to get to school. So this is tiring, and she might not be able to concentrate because of fatigue. So that we can sympathize with her for that. And then another thing, she was abused by Mabegzo in many levels. Physically, we know that Mabegzo wanted to sexually assault her. So physically, she was abused. Emotionally, Mabegzo kept proposing love to her, promising, threatening. So she was emotionally abused by Mabegzo, and also verbally, because he would speak. Mabegzo would speak in a threatening way as he tried to propose to her. So we can sympathize with Hlengiwe in this instance. Then she watched her parents die. In the story, there's a moment where the writer describes Hlengiwe's father in his deathbed. So we can sympathize with her because she was quite young when her father died. And again, because of the death of the parents, she was left with the burden of taking care of her siblings. This is not an easy task because she found herself having to be responsible, to assume the role of a parent as young as she was. We're still making I'm still giving you points that make us sympathize with Hlengiwe. She had to ensure that her siblings had food to eat on a daily basis. This was not easy because there was nothing. They were very poor, and so she had to try by all means to ensure that her siblings and herself, they get food on a daily basis. Another thing that makes us sympathize with Hlengiwe is that she had to grow up and assume the role of a parent. I've already said that. And she was not prepared for this because the parents died in as much as they were ill, but she wasn't prepared to become a parent at this age. She had to make sure that she had bus fare and food for her siblings. This is not easy for a young child. And again, no one protected her from Mapegzo. As we have mentioned earlier, that Mapegzo would verbally abuse her, emotionally abuse her, and no one was there to protect her. And on the day of when Mapegzo almost assaulted her, if he had managed to sexually assault her, probably he would have infected her with a deadly disease. So there is a lot that we can mention that supports this question that how has the writer made us to sympathize with Hlengiwe. Now we will move on to the model response, how to respond to such a question. So the question again is, how does the writer make us to sympathize with Hlengiwe in the story? In our previous lessons, we spoke about the peel model. The peel model means one should make a point, what others call a claim. If I say Mapegzo is evil, I am making a point or a claim, and then I have to give evidence. So you then give an examples, which is the E in peel. Example, give an example to substantiate your claim, and then explain your example, and then make a comment. The L stands for link, so you link your comment to the point or the claim that you have made. This is a personal response. Some call it a personal response. This is a typical example or model of how to respond now. So the writer makes us to sympathize with Hlengiwe when she has to walk a long distance to school. This is a claim that you're making, a point. She has to walk a long distance to school. Now we need an example, because anyone can claim this. We need evidence from the story. We are told that she walked 23 kilometers to and from school every day. So that's your example. This is a really bad situation as this distance is quite long and tiresome, yet she is expected to concentrate in class, and this might be difficult because of the fatigue from walking a long distance. You are explaining the example you have given. You have said in your example, she has to walk a long distance. Now you are explaining how you sympathize with her for walking a long distance. You're telling us that this is a long distance, it is tiresome, and when she gets to school, she is expected to concentrate, and this might be difficult. Now, when you make your personal response, you say, I am deeply moved by Hlengiwe's situation. You might continue to explain, but this will suffice if you say that. That is your personal comment. Another example I've given, still on the same question, is another thing that makes us to sympathize with Hlengiwe is when she has to ensure that her siblings get food on a daily basis. That is your point. So we are told that now that's your point, that she has to get food on a daily basis, and then you need an example now. We are told that she had to do piece jobs to get money to buy food and get money for transport. To buy food and get money for transport. So now this is your example. Now you need to explain your example for it to convince, because when you write a traditional essay, remember that you use persuasive language. You want to convince the marker of what you have made, the claim that you have made. I pity Hlengiwe. because she has not, and she does not enjoy being a child, and assumes the role of the parent, as she now has to ensure that her siblings have food on a daily basis. You are explaining the example you have given. I am touched by what she goes through. That is the comment. You can elaborate this comment. Why are you touched by what she goes through? What has impacted you? But make sure you are within the point you have made, because that's why we call it a link. So that is it for our lesson today. So today we were looking at the plot summary, what the plot is. The plot is the sequence of events in a story. They help us in responding to questions. It is important to know the sequence of events and also the characters in the story. It's important to know them and know their character trait, their personality. You know the character trait of the characters by looking at their behavior and what others say about them in the story, and also what the information the writer will give you about the characters. So, and then we moved on to looking at a question. When you attempt a question, make sure that you collect information before you answer the question. We first collected information. How does the writer make us sympathize with Lengiwe? We collected examples from the story, extracted examples from the story that make us to sympathize with Lengiwe before we moved on to looking at how to then respond to the traditional question by using the pill model, which is the point, the example, explanation, and the link, which is a personal response linked to the point that you have made. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the lesson.
Thank you very much for being with us, Ms. Debenguni. We're hoping that we're going to see you again. But before you leave, the viewer at home has a question for you, which is, what is the difference between a traditional essay and empathic essay?
Emphatic question.
Yes.
Okay. Traditional essay is more of an argumentative type of question where you need to convince the marker of the points that you have made. Yet the emphatic question is where you assume to be the character. Pretend you are Lengiwe just before Mabegzo or the moment that Mabegzo tries to assault you. So you have to get into Lengiwe's mind, think the way Lengiwe would think, and try and respond to that kind of scenario if you were Lengiwe. So that's the difference. This side you just collect information from the text, but in this case, when you look at the emphatic, it is character based. You need to assume the thoughts, the voice of the character, the way that character thinks. You need to think like them as you respond.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sure that the viewer at home was well explained too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lerato.
I had said that we're hoping to see you again next time.
I hope so too.
Okay. Up next is my colleague Nogwazi Dlamini, who is going to be presenting the next Form 5 subjects, which are religious education and physics. So Form 5s, do not go anywhere. Grab a snack, grab something to eat, because Nogwazi will be back after this infomercial.
COVID-19, yes, the coronavirus. It is now our daily talk. It is now our everyday breaking news. I think it's high time we all come together and make sure we bring an end to this. Cause we can't sit down while it's still taking over. Let's all follow all the precautions given by the health department so that we can protect ourselves and also protect others. I just wash my hands before I touch. I just close my mouth before I cough. I just close my mouth before I sneeze. And I don't go to parties, that's a risk. Yeah. I see. I wash my hands before I touch. I see. I close my mouth before I cough. I see. I close my mouth before I sneeze. I see. I don't go to parties, that's a risk. I see. People going through a lot. I see. Coronavirus is a threat. I see. I don't go to parties, that's a risk. I see. I close my mouth before I cough. In case you're wondering, just wash your hands in case you handle things, and then keep an eye if you sneeze or cough. Gotta keep it covered. I mean, who am I? Just a person living. Wanna see you living, cause I value life. Eswatini, raise up, we gon' fight and conquer, cause we really got this. I see. I wash my hands before I touch. I see. I close my mouth before I cough. I see. I close my mouth before I sneeze. I see. I don't go to parties, that's a risk. Believe that some of the people you know can never be trusted at all. You gotta be cautious. Wash your hands more often. Can't trust everything that we touch. And when you sneeze, you gotta make sure you cover your mouth, but not with your hands, cause you do not know who you gonna touch or what you have touched. Before all of that, avoid meeting up with too many people. For your own good and everyone else, you gotta make sure you keep it all clean. Watch how you maneuver, look after yourself. A hand sanitizer won't kill you. Make sure that you use running water. Just think of our brothers and sisters in the country and the ones that are outside the borders. Yeah. I see. I wash my hands before I touch. I see. I close my mouth before I cough. I see. I close my mouth before I sneeze. I see. I don't go to parties, that's a risk. Let's all come together and all say, not today, coronavirus.
Litiko letempilo kweselixwayisile ngesifo lesivelile kulamalanga i-coronavirus COVID-19 bagcizelela kakhulu ukuhlendeka kwetandla lokumcoka ukuthi itandla digezwe nawugeza tandla ke bashilo ukuthi digeze lokungenani ama-seconds lam-20 ngemanti lagijimako lanesipho. Lokunye ke basixwayise ngawo ukuthi latingalweni lingahlala leligciwane uthi ngakuthi letingalo nato utiwashe ungashintshe itandla kuphela for 20 seconds nalamkhathini ngetandla ugeze nakhona litawufa ligciwane kanjalo. Ngiyacela ma-loyal viewers geza intandla nihlale ekhaya nihlale niphephile stay inqobe COVID-19.
Now, from the moment it was announced that there will be no sporting activities due to the ongoing COVID-19, we all felt that. But imagine how much work you can do in your house just using your chair. It could be anything you have in your house. Take a look at this. From my own chair, I'm able to exercise 30 minutes per day, from biceps to triceps to my abs. But what are you waiting for? It is doable, it is possible. I'm able to do all the work. No matter how much time it will take me, I will stay active. Now, if you're a soccer player, an athlete, a gym instructor, anyone who loves exercising, use this time. It is doable in the house, in your own time.
A very warm welcome back to our viewers and a very good afternoon to especially the Form 5s. This is your first lesson for the day, which is religious education. My name is Nogwazi Dlamini. Already in the studio with me is the religious education teacher, Tulisile Vilagati. Also joining me in the studio is our sign language interpreter, Nombumelelo Hadebe. How are you doing today, Tulisile?
I'm doing well, Nogwazi.
I'm doing well as well, thank you. I understand we're doing the church at Antioch. I don't know if I'm saying it right.
Yes, it's Acts chapter 11.
Okay,
Yes.
Acts chapter 11. That's what
yes.
we're doing today.
Yes.
What are you expecting your Form 5 learner to have learned by the end of this lesson?
Okay, the outcome of the lesson is to help learners understand or to know about the aftermath of the Gentile conversion, because the last time we saw Gentiles converting to Christianity. So now we're looking at the aftermath or the outcome.
Okay. From fives, I hope that you are ready. I'm thinking they're going to need their Bibles.
Yes, thank you, Nogwazi, for reminding me. Make sure your learning material is ready from 5, RSV Bible, your notebook, your pen, and your textbook as well for reference.
All right, get your materials ready from fives. And just a reminder that we are live right now on YouTube and on Facebook. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to use our WhatsApp number. Tulsile, you may please begin with your lesson.
Thank you very much, Nogwazi. A very good afternoon, dear learners at home, and welcome to the religious education lesson. And the topic for the day is a church at Antioch, as already mentioned, and it's found in Acts chapter 11, verses 1 to 30. So it's the whole chapter. As you are noticing, my dear learner, we are moving with the chapters. So the lesson objectives, by the end of this lesson, we are expecting you to be able to relate Peter's discussion with the church in Jerusalem, to explain the significance of this discussion, to describe the activities of the church at Antioch. This church was not silent, this church was busy, so you have to describe those activities, to analyze the character of Peter, Barnabas, and the church as a whole, and then lastly, you should be able to explain lessons drawn from the church at Antioch. And then the introduction, my dear Lena, we're going to introduce our lesson by just doing a brief recap of the conversion of Cornelius, because this lesson will only make sense if you only understand and recall what was happening in the conversion of Cornelius. So then you recall, my dear Lena, in the previous lesson that we looked at how Cornelius converted. Actually, we started from Peter's vision, or we started from Cornelius' encounter with the angel to Peter's vision, and then Peter going to Cornelius' house, and then Peter delivering his sermon, and lastly, the Gentile Pentecost. So we are saying, my dear Lena, this account or this incident of Cornelius' conversion is actually a fulfillment of what we've been referring to. That's Acts chapter 1, verse 8, the Great Commission. So the gospel spreads to the Gentile world as per Jesus' command. And then, my dear Lena, as a summary of the previous lesson, I have this very important analysis question for you that I want you to work on. As I promised that I'm going to give you something to work on. So the question is, explain the differences between the Jewish Pentecost and the Gentile Pentecost. I hope you recall, my dear Lena, we came across the Jewish Pentecost in Acts chapter 2. I think you still remember Acts chapter 2, the Jewish Pentecost. So now, my dear Lena, we have already covered the Gentile Pentecost. So your task here is to look at the differences and then you explain. So I have some leads. I've got something that can guide you as you work on this question. Remember, you will be explaining. What I have is just a guide. So you can use the first point. In the Jewish Pentecost, as you might recall, there was a sound. There were physical signs. Like the sound, you remember that they heard a sound like the rush of a mighty wind. Yet, in the Gentile Pentecost, we hear nothing about sound. So that's the first difference. Remember to expand on your point because you are explaining. And then secondly, another difference is that the Jewish Pentecost was anticipated. They were anticipating it. Remember, Jesus had promised them that they shall receive power. And this was anticipated, which means it's something that they were expecting to happen. Yet with the Gentile Pentecost, we see that it was spontaneous. It was not expected. They were not promised anything. And then another point that you can use, you can also say the Jewish Pentecost, my dear Lena, found them praying together. Remember, they were in one room during the day of Pentecost, observing the Pentecost festival. So it's a difference. Yet with the Gentile Pentecost, Peter had honored Cornelius' invitation, and the Pentecost was triggered by Peter's sermon. I hope you are noting these differences, my dear Lena. So you can combine these points and then respond to the question, and the question is worth 6 marks. And then we move to Peter's discussions with the Jerusalem church. Remember, after the conversion of Cornelius, the church in Jerusalem heard that Peter had visited a Gentile and ate with Gentiles. So they took Peter into task. Now let's see what is happening with his discussions. And it's the first part of the account from from verses 1 to 18. So here is the account, my dear Lena, summarized. What happened here when Peter returned to Jerusalem after his encounter with Cornelius? We are told that members of the circumcision party accused him. So the brethren and the apostles had heard that Peter was from Caesarea, from a Gentile context. And then they accused him, they criticized him. What did they say? They said, why did you go to uncircumcised men and ate with them? And then what did Peter do, my dear Lena? He didn't respond to their question. He didn't argue with them. Instead, he decided to retell. He decided to tell them of what happened. So he began with the account of the sheet from heaven, which means he began with the vision. This is the vision. So he narrated the vision to them, what happened, moving to his encounter with Cornelius, and then up to the Gentile Pentecost. Peter didn't want to raise any argument. He just wanted them to judge from what he narrated to them. And then to seal his discussion, he then made a quote in Luke 3 verse 16, also in Acts 1 verse 5, where Jesus says, John baptized with water, but you shall be baptized with the Holy Spirit. And in Luke, it's John himself telling the audience that he's only baptizing them with water, but Christ was coming, who shall baptize them with the Holy Spirit. So Peter makes reference to this in order to convince them that what he was doing, or his visitation to Cornelius, was not for his own selfish ambitions, but rather it was a fulfillment of what Jesus said about the baptism. And then after this, how did they react? They were silenced. They had nothing else to say, and they glorified God, saying that even the Gentiles have received repentance unto life. So that is Peter's discussion, my dear Lena, with the church in Jerusalem. Why was this discussion important? It was very significant for the following reasons. This discussion marked the formal acceptance of Gentiles into the Christian church. We have already mentioned that the Jews considered themselves as the chosen nation. To them, salvation was a prerogative. You know, they didn't understand that other people, other nations were accepted. So after Peter had told them everything, they now understood and they accepted the Gentiles. Also, this discussion led to unity and peace in the church. The fact that they defined themselves or categorized themselves as Jewish believers and Gentile believers, it meant that there was division. But after this discussion, the Jewish believers understood that even the Gentiles are welcome. Hence, they no longer had these expectations, because to them, in order for a Gentile believer to accept it, they had to be circumcised. They had to align themselves with the Jewish laws. But after this discussion, they understood that no, there is no reason for stigmatization or discrimination. Everyone is welcome. Hence, there was unity and peace. And also, this discussion, my dear Lena, serves as a reminder of the command that we always talk about, Acts 1 verse 8. How was it a reminder? The fact that Peter narrated, told them what happened. He wanted them to judge for themselves. These were apostles. These were brethren. They knew about the command. So they were just reminded. It was just a reminder because they were aware of it. And then lastly, this discussion resolved the conflict that threatened to divide the church. The fact that when Peter went to Jerusalem, they were waiting for him to ask him why he visited a Gentile. So already there was division. There was opposition and hostility. The church in Jerusalem thought Peter betrayed them. How could he, a fellow Jew, go to Gentiles? Yet he knew that was not allowed. So there was this conflict. But after Peter clarified everything to them, there was the conflict was then resolved. And then we moved, my dear Lena, to the church at Antioch now, which is actually the last part of the account, because the first part is the discussion. But before we move to the last part of the account, let's look at the church at Antioch. Let's look at Antioch as a city in order for us to better understand the activities of the church. So Antioch is said to be a Gentile city. Remember, with Caesarea, we said the same. And it's about 650 kilometers north of Jerusalem. It's also described as a center of government for the Roman province, Syria and Cilicia. And it's considered the third greatest city in the world at the time. It was considered the third greatest city after Rome and Alexandria. So it was also huge. It was also rich in cultural diversity. It was rich in cultural diversity, consists of different cultures, and it was known for bad morals. So imagine a church that has to be established in this place. Bad morals and strange religions, what we call cults, dominated by cults. A good example were cults like Artemis. So there were a variety of religious groups in this city. And then we are also told that Christianity came as a result of Stephen's persecution in this city. Those who fled to Antioch, they were escaping from persecution. That's where they preached, and then they established the church. So Christianity came as a result of Stephen's persecution in Antioch. And then I have this map for you, my dear Lena, serving as a source. As we have already said, here is our Antioch. We said it's 650 kilometers north of Jerusalem, as you can see. And we said it was the center. As you can see here, it's in the center of government for the Roman provinces of Cilicia and Syria, as you can see here, my dear Elena. And then the account of the activities of the church in Antioch. As I've said, this was a busy church. They were not just quiet or silent, but there were activities. So the account is found in Acts chapter 11, verse 19 to 30. Here is the account, my dear Lena. We are told that the believers who fled after Stephen's martyrdom, they fled to different places, including Phoenicia and Cyprus and to Antioch. And those that fled to these places preached only to the Jews. And then there were also men from Cyprus and Cyrene who preached to the Hellenists, the Greek-speaking Jews and Gentiles. Then we are told that a number of believers increased, contrary to what we've seen prior where they were persecuted, but the number of believers increased. So Christianity flourished here. It became a social force in the Roman Empire. And then when the church in Jerusalem, remember the main church, when they heard of this, when they heard how the people of Antioch were receiving the gospel, they sent Barnabas in Antioch to help the church, to assist the church, nurturing them. And then when Barnabas reached Antioch, he was glad to find them committed in their faith, and then he exhorted them, he encouraged them to remain steadfast. Remember, Barnabas is described as a son of encouragement, so he's good in motivating and encouraging. So he encouraged them, and then after Barnabas had observed that the workload was so overwhelming, he couldn't cope because more believers were added. Then he went to Tarsus to seek for Saul's assistant. So he went to seek for Saul in Tarsus so that Saul can come and assist him. And you remember the last time we saw Saul, after his conversion, he was sent off to Tarsus for his own protection because he was now persecuted. So Barnabas goes to Tarsus to search for Saul, and he comes back. They work together for a whole year doing wondrous deeds. And then we are also told in the account that the church in Jerusalem was still impressed about the way the Antioch church handled themselves. So then they even sent prophets. Prophets came from Jerusalem to Antioch. And for example, we have prophets like Agabus, a great prophet who foretold that there would be a great famine in the land. And when the disciples heard that, showing their determination, then they were each determined to contribute according to their ability. So what did they do? They decided to send the relief to the brethren through the elders by sending Barnabas and Saul. So they are the first church. They are the first church to send missionaries, as you will note in the next part, my dear Lena. And then there are these certain things that I want you to take note of. It's quite peculiar about the church in Antioch. So let's take note. We are noting that this church, my dear Lena, the followers of Jesus Christ were called Christians for the first time in Antioch. All along, they've been referred to as the people of the way, the believers. But for the first time, I hope you are noting that, for the first time, they are called Christians. And we are told, scholars tell us that this name began as some kind of a mockery. It was a witty way of referring to them. You are a Christian, you are behaving, you are doing like Christ. It was a way of mocking them. And as time went by, the Christians got used to the name. It stuck, and they tend to appreciate it, and then it became a name of honor to them. And looking at the word Christian, my dear Lena, the ending en meant the party of. Therefore, a Christian is someone who is the party of Jesus. Just like in the Roman army, it was common for soldiers to add en in their general's name to identify themselves. Take, for instance, a soldier under Caesar. It was common for himself to refer himself or to give himself the title Caesarian. So the same thing with Christian. It's more like saying Jesusite, if we had anything like that. So taken from the Jesus Christ. So they were Christians. Also, what we have to note about this church is that they were a diverse community. Remember, we were told that Antioch was a very busy place. They were a diverse community, but even though they were a diverse community, different cultural backgrounds, they were united. They were united by belief in Christ. Their Christ-like behavior, as we have already said. Also, about the city of Antioch, we are told that it was the first city to have a Gentile congregation. All along, we've been talking about Gentile believers, but for the first time, we see a church, a congregation, Gentile congregation. It all began in Antioch. It was also the first city or the first church to provide relief to another congregation. We've been referring to the characteristics of the early church, sharing and all that, but all we've been referring to were members of the church sharing among themselves. For the first time, we see a church sending or providing relief to another church. The church at Antioch provided relief to the church in Jerusalem. And then lastly, what is peculiar about this church is that they were the first to send out missionaries. They sent Barnabas and Saul for the first time. And then let's look at the characters, my dear Anna, beginning with Peter. Remember, in the first part, we looked at the discussion that Peter had with the church in Jerusalem. In that discussion, we see that Peter is portrayed as someone who is wise. Where is Peter's wisdom in all this? When they criticized him of visiting a Gentile, he doesn't argue with them. Instead, he decides to narrate, to tell them the story of what happened, and they were going to judge for themselves. And also the fact that Peter brought the 6 brethren with him as witnesses, that's another strategy that he used, because he knew that at the end they were going to act as his witnesses, just like he's doing here when he's narrating. He says, I took these 6 brethren with me, and it was a strategy. It shows that he is wise. And maybe let's take eloquent. His eloquence, when we are told in the account that he told them everything in order, beginning from the vision to the Gentile Pentecost. And even his edition of the court from Acts chapter 1 verse 5, his reference to John the Baptist, the baptism and all that, it shows his eloquence, because it is what convinced them that what he was saying actually was authentic. And then maybe we can say Peter is assertive. We see him being non-apologetic. He doesn't show to be remorseful for visiting a Gentile. Instead, he tries to prove to them, and at the end we see that they are silenced. They glorify God. And then maybe let's move to Barnabas. We see him being obedient, collaborative, motivational, and devout. Examples of Barnabas being obedient: when the church in Jerusalem sent him to go to the church in Antioch, he obeys. He doesn't defy that. He's also collaborative. When he saw that the task was becoming more overwhelming for him, he understood that teamwork is beneficial. So he went to Tarsus, all the way to Tarsus, to seek for Paul to collaborate with, and it worked at his advantage because they did a lot of things together. Then maybe we can end with him being motivational. When he came to Antioch, he was glad that they were committed, and he motivated, he encouraged them to be steadfast. And then lastly, we have the Antioch church. The Antioch church is described as committed. They are committed because they, after repentance, they continued. sticking to the teachings, and this is what attracted the church in Jerusalem. Hence, they were able to send Barnabas because they saw that this church was committed. They're also generous. We are told that after they heard the prophecy from Agabus, they then sent relief through the hands of Barnabas and Saul. And also we are told that they are exemplary. They are living a Christ-like life. This is what the people of Antioch saw in them when they designated them Christians, thinking they are mocking them. So they are exemplary in their daily living. And then let's look at the lessons that one could draw from both Peter's discussions and the church at Antioch. We learned that we should be committed in our faith. Be committed in your faith. How so? Look at the church in Antioch. They were committed in their faith. That's why we see Barnabas coming to them and encouraging them. And that's why we see the church in Jerusalem being attracted to their actions. We should be generous, just like the church in Antioch, who gave generously to the believers who were attacked by the famine. You should live a Christ-like life, just like the church in Antioch. They didn't demand to be called Christians, but people saw their behavior, people saw their attitude, the way they lived, and then they were called Christians. So it's very important for one to live a Christ-like life, because it is what actually attracts people. You should also collaborate with like-minded people. Take, for instance, Barnabas, who saw it fit to go and seek for Saul to come and assist him, because he knew that they are like-minded. They have the same goal. They have the same vision. And then maybe you can also expand, my dear Lena, on encourage and inspire others. Find examples from the account, and also be eloquent and defend your actions. And then I have this assessment question, my dear Lena, that I want you to work on. Again, it's an evaluation question, but this one is a bit different because it's contextual. The evaluation questions that we are used to are ones that will require you to demonstrate relevance, but this one is contextual. By contextual, we mean that you should know the context of the story in order for you to evaluate. Here is the question. The church at Antioch of Syria was better than the church at Jerusalem. To what extent do you agree? Give reasons for your answer and show you have thought about different points of view. It would be extremely difficult for you, my dear Lena, to respond to this question if you don't know anything about the church at Antioch of Syria and the church at Jerusalem. That's why I said it's contextual. You must understand the context. So again, I've got some leads. Here are some points that you are going to use as you work on this question. Remember, it's an evaluation question. You're going to do that. I have only points. For yes, you can take a stand and say, yes, I think the church at Antioch of Syria was better than the church at Jerusalem, because the church at Antioch lived a remarkable Christ-like lifestyle. You support how? The church was generous. You support how? They were pace setters. And also they were the first to send out missionaries. Remember to develop an argument. Support all your points. And then on the other side, you can say, however, others may disagree and say the church at Antioch of Syria was not better than the church at Jerusalem, because it's the church in Jerusalem that sent Barnabas to take care of the Antioch church, which means the church in Antioch can't be better than the church that actually looked after them. And then it's also the church in Jerusalem that sent prophets to Antioch, prophets like Agabus, as we've already mentioned, and also it was the main church. Remember, it was the main headquarters. It was the headquarters where the teachings of the apostles began. So here is our expected responses, my dear Lena. But I will be very impressed if you will take this and write it and create a response for 8 marks. We've come to the end of the lesson, my dear Lena. I hope if you have any questions, you know where to forward them. And I hope this lesson was of benefit to you. Just a summary of what we covered today. We began with Peter's discussions with the church in Jerusalem. And then we moved to the significance of the discussion. And then we moved to the church in Antioch. The activities of the church, what makes the church peculiar from other churches. And then we looked at the moral lessons and the characters of Peter, Barnabas, and the church in Antioch. And then I gave you an assessment. For next week, please make sure that you read Acts chapter 12, further persecution by Herod, in preparation for the lesson. Thank you very much. Unless Nogwazi has got some questions.
I actually do have a question. So one of your Form 5 learners is asking, was it Saul or Stephen who persecuted the church? That's the question.
My dear Lena, Stephen. Yeah, Stephen was a deacon. I hope, my dear, thank you very much, Nogwazi. Right. My dear Lena, I hope you recall, Stephen was the persecuted, not the persecutor. My Lena is asking, who persecuted?
The church.
The church. Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Stephen was the one who was persecuted. I hope you remember, my dear Lena, in Acts chapter 7, we saw him being martyred. Saul gave consent to his martyrdom. So please make the distinction. Stephen was the one persecuted to the point of death. Saul was the persecutor. But now we see him spreading the gospel. I hope you are noting the change. I hope my Elena has been answered. No, as I don't know.
I hope so too. I hope they have been answered. Thank you very much, Tulisila, for your lesson. Are we seeing you again very soon? I'm hoping.
I'm not sure. If God permits, maybe.
All right.
Be
Okay.
back.
Thank you so much for your
Thank
lesson.
you.
Form 5's up next is physics for you guys with Mr. Patrick Dlamini. I will be right back after this.
Akili, 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 akili. Will you wash your hands with me? I want to wash my hands with you. Come on, I will show you what to do. Wash your hands in clean water. Wash your hands, wet them with the water. Wash your hands, now add some soap. Scrub your hands in the soap and water. Scrub above and below between the fingers too. Scrub under your nails and scrub a dub-a-doo. Rinse your hands in water. Rinse them clean, rinse away the soap. Dry your hands and go.
Akili, why do we wash our hands?
To wash away the germs.
Akili, what are germs?
They're like tiny little bugs on your hands and they can make you sick.
But I don't see any germs on my hand.
That's because they're so tiny that you can't even see them.
Oh wow! I want to wash the germs away. Will you wash your hands with me, Akili?
Of course! Wash your hands in clean water. Wash your hands, wet them with the water. Wash your hands, now add some soap. Scrub your hands in the soap and water. Scrub above and below between the fingers too. Scrub under your nails and scrub a dub-a-doo. Rinse your hands in water. Rinse them clean, rinse away the soap. Dry your hands and go. Great job, Huruma! Can you tell me the 4 things we did to wash our hands?
I can try.
1.
Wash our hands with water.
2.
Put soap on our hands.
3.
Scrub our hands all over.
4.
Rinse our hands clean with water.
Wash your hands, wash the germs away.
COVID-19, yes, the coronavirus. It is now our daily talk. It is now our everyday breaking news. I think it's high time we all come together and make sure we bring an end to this. Cause we can't sit down while it's still taking over. Let's all follow all the precautions given by the health department so that we can protect ourselves and also protect others.
I just wash my hands before I touch.
I just close my mouth before I cough. And I just close my mouth before I sneeze. And I don't go to parties, that's a risk, yeah. I see. I wash my hands before I touch. I see. I close my mouth before I cough. I see. I close my mouth before I sneeze. I see. I don't go to parties, that's a risk. I see. People going through a lot. I see. Coronavirus is a threat. I see. I don't go to parties, that's a risk. I see. I close my mouth before I cough. In case you're wondering, just wash your hands in case you handle things, and then keep an eye if you sneeze or cough, gotta keep it covered. I mean, who am I? Just a person living, wanna see you living, cause I value life. Eswatini, raise up, we gon' fight and conquer, cause we really got this. I see. I wash my hands before I touch. I see. I close my mouth before I cough. I see. I close my mouth before I sneeze. I see. I don't go to parties, that's a risk.
Believe that some of the people you know can never be trusted at all. You gotta be cautious. Wash your hands more often. Can trust everything that we touch. And when you sneeze, you gotta make sure you cover your mouth, but not with your hands, cause you do not know who you gonna touch or what you have touched. Before all of that, avoid meeting up with too many people for your own good and everyone else. You gotta make sure you keep it all clean. Watch how you maneuver, look after yourself. A hand sanitizer won't kill you. Make sure that you use running water. Just think of our brothers and sisters in the country and the ones that are outside the borders. Yeah.
I see. I wash my hands before I touch. I see. I close my mouth before I cough. I see. I close my mouth before I sneeze. I see. I don't go to parties, that's a risk. Let's all come together and all say, not today, coronavirus.
A warm welcome back to our viewers and a very good afternoon on this beautiful Thursday afternoon. You are still tuned in to Eswatini TV and this is Home Study. My name is Nogwazi Dlamini and right now we are doing the second lesson for the Form 5s and the last lesson actually for the day, which is physics with Mr. Patrick Dlamini, who is already with me in the studio. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm good, Nogwazi. How are you?
I'm doing good, thank you very much. Today we're doing forces, motion and moments, right?
Exactly, that's forces, motion and moments today.
Okay, what are you expecting your Form 5 learner at home to have learned by the end of the lesson?
Well, dear learner at home, welcome to our physics lesson today. So today's topic, as we have stated, is forces, motion and moments. Here are the objectives, dear learner. So the first objective for today here is to describe. So you should be able to describe the ways in which force may change the motion of a body. That's the first objective for today. So you should be able to describe the ways in which a force may change the motion of a body. Then the second thing you should be able to do here is to describe what we call friction, and then state advantages and disadvantages of friction. So it's to describe friction and state advantages and disadvantages of friction. Then the third objective for today is to use the relationship between force, mass and acceleration. So that relationship is given by this equation here, which is force equal to mass times acceleration. Another objective for today is to describe the moment of a force as the measure of its turning effect and give some examples, that is giving everyday examples on these moments. Then the last objective for today is to calculate the moment of a given force when you are given necessary information. That's what the learner is expected to do by the end of this lesson, Nogwazi.
All right, thank you for that, Patrick. And I think we can carry on with your lesson.
Thank you once again, Nogwazi. Well, dear learner at home, I hope now you are ready for our lesson. As we have mentioned, the topic is on forces, motion, and moments. Well, one may ask, why do we actually do this in science? On daily basis, we see moving objects. So be it cars, even human beings, and even animals, they move around. So in science, it's basically easy to explain the motion of these objects, the way they behave while moving around. So if you have learned forces and the motion, you will be in a position to explain some of the things we see from these moving object. One thing we can say here is that when you have studied forces, that is studying forces and motion, it helps us to explain why maybe a ball which is kicked with a small force on a level ground rolls for a short time. So that ball rolls for a short time and then stops. So if you have that knowledge on this topic, you'll be able to explain why this ball rolls for a short time and then stop. Then another thing here, knowing about forces, or knowledge about forces and motion helps us to explain why it is easier to run on the ground than to run on a polished floor. So this will help us to be able to explain why it's easier to run on the ground than on a polished floor. Then doing moments helps us to explain why it is easier to tighten a nut using a spanner than using our fingers, because usually when using your fingers, you'll have a hard time when tightening that nut. It becomes easier when using a spanner. So knowledge about moments helps you to know why is that the case. Right now, we can move on and look at how forces affect the motion of a body. That is forces and motion. Now we'll start by looking at an object at rest. So if we consider an object at rest, for instance, maybe if you just leave your book on top of the table, so that book will be just at rest. So if we look at an object at rest, what we can say about it, one thing we can say is that for an object at rest, it takes a force for it to move. So if that object is at rest, then there must be a force applied to that object for it to move around. And if that object is actually moving, so looking at a moving object, once again, it takes a force for that object to go faster, slower, or to change direction. So if an object is moving, there must be a force applied on the object for it to go faster or to go slower or even to change direction. For instance, if maybe you are looking at a ball which is rolling on the ground, so there must be a force which is applied there in order for the ball to change its speed, maybe even to stop the ball. There must be a force applied on that ball. So that's what we are saying. Then another thing you have to note here is that all objects resist change in velocity due to inertia. Then what is this inertia we are talking about? So we're saying all objects, they always resist change in motion due to inertia. Then what is inertia? So by inertia, dear learner, we mean that property of the body that makes it resist the change in due to its mass. Is that property of a body which makes it resist any change due to its mass. That's inertia when looking at objects. So all objects have inertia, so they will resist change in velocity due to their mass. Now, we can say here, so here is what we call Newton's first law of motion. Looking at a body at rest, so we can say any body which is at rest will remain at rest. And if that body is moving, we can say it continues to move with a constant velocity in a straight line unless a force acts on that body. So for any body which is at rest, if you leave that body at rest, that body will remain at rest forever unless you come back and apply a force on that body. But if that body is moving, so it continues to move with a constant velocity in a straight line unless somebody else come and apply a force on that body, then that body is going to change the state of motion there. So this is what we call Newton's first law of motion. Right, now we can continue looking at this illustration here. In this case, we have a ball here. So this ball is here is at rest. So this object at rest, we are saying it's going to remain here. So if it's placed on the pitch or maybe on the grass, so this ball will remain here forever unless somebody comes and apply a force on this ball. Then that ball will actually move or change its state of motion. For instance, here, unless a force is applied on the ball, then the ball is going to move. Then if we look at this ball here, this ball is actually moving in that direction. So we are saying for a moving object, so that object continues to move with a constant velocity in a straight line, unless again there is a force which is actually applied on that body. That's when that body will change the state of motion. For instance, here, that net here then blocks that ball. So that ball will then change its direction of movement when it's actually blocked by that net there. So that's what we have according to Newton's first law. So for a body at rest, it remains at rest unless there is a force which is applied on it. And if that body is moving, it continues to move with a constant velocity in a straight line unless there comes a force to interact with that body. Then it's going to change its state of motion. Then we have also discussed what we call inertia. We said inertia is that property of a body which is actually caused it to resist motion due to its mass. Now, looking at inertia here, we have in this diagram here, we have some passengers in a bus. So if you look at these passengers, as the bus moves forward there, due to inertia, each passenger is going to experience a backward push. So each passenger is going to experience a backward push. So once again, the bus is moving forward, and this each passenger is actually at rest. So each passenger is going to resist the motion by experiencing that backward push. So as the bus moves forward, each passenger is going to experience a backward push due to what we call inertia there. Then now, if we look at the second diagram here, so in this case, we have a driver here who suddenly applies some brakes. So normally what happens there, due to inertia, you find that that seat belt actually tightens when that driver actually suddenly apply some brakes there. It's because once again, we're looking at a moving body. We said a body will always continue to move with a constant velocity in a straight line unless there is a force which is actually applied on it. Then due to inertia, when the driver there suddenly applies some brakes, you find that that individual there is going to continue moving, although the motion has just changed there. So it's going to resist, the person is going to resist the change in motion and continue to move forward due to inertia. So because of inertia, we can say that driver is going to feel a jerk when the brakes are actually applied on that vehicle there. Then now we can move on and look at Newton's second law of motion. So in this case, we are going to look at the relationship between the resultant force, the mass, and the acceleration of a moving object. So what we can say here is that when we have two unbalanced forces together, they are equal to a single force. So if we have two unbalanced forces, their sum is actually equal to a single force. So this single force is what we call a resultant force. So a resultant force is actually a sum of two unbalanced or two or more unbalanced forces. They result into what we call a resultant force. They are illustrated in this diagram here. So we can look at this diagram. So we have this cut here. So this cut is actually there are two forces which are applied on the cut, pulling the cut forward. So in this case, we have that force which is actually 60 Newton. And we have a force of 30 newtons, which is actually to the right. Then looking at what we call the resultant force, again, it will be the sum of these forces because the two forces are in the same direction towards the right. So the resultant force on the cart there will be the sum of the two forces. So you say 60 newtons plus 30 newtons. So your resultant force will be that 90 newtons. Again, the direction of that resultant force will be to the right because both forces are acting in the same direction, which is towards the right. So that's the resultant force on that cart there. But in the second cart here, so if we look at that cart here, so we can say now the resultant force, in order to get the resultant force, there are two forces. One is 30 newtons, which is to the right, and that force to the left is actually 10 newtons. So the resultant force on that cart will be the difference there. So we say the bigger force, which is 30 newtons, minus the smaller force, which is 10 newtons. So when you say 30 minus 10, you get the resultant force, which is 20 newtons. Once again, the bigger force is on the right, so that 20 newtons will be to the right. So that body or that cart will have that resultant force, which is 20 newtons to the right. So now, looking at this resultant force, so we can say if forces are balanced, then we can say the resultant force will be 0 and there will be no acceleration. So balanced forces mean that the two forces are actually equal and are acting in opposite direction. So for instance, if we can have maybe this object here, then we can have two forces which are actually acting on that object there. Maybe the two forces will have the same magnitude. Maybe each force, maybe let's say 5 newtons, and this one is also 5 newtons. So if the two forces are actually 5 newtons, then the two forces are balanced. Then this body here, there will be no acceleration. So it's going to move at a constant velocity there. So it's going to move at a constant velocity if the two forces are equal. So our resultant force will be 5 newtons minus 5 newtons, which is 0 there. Then a resultant force can cause acceleration in the same direction as the force. So a resultant force can cause acceleration in the same direction as the force. Now, looking at this diagram here, we can see that here on this mass, actually there is a force which is applied on the mass. So when that is actually done, applying that force on that mass, we see that the acceleration of that mass will be in that direction of the force which is actually applied on that mass. So a force applied on a mass will result in an acceleration which is in the same direction as the force which is being applied on that mass. Then if there is more force which is applied, or the force applied on that mass is actually increased, so we expect that the speed of that mass will actually increase at a faster rate, or the acceleration of that mass will actually be increased there. Then what's the relationship between the force, the mass, and the acceleration? So this is given by what we call Newton's second law here. So we can say the relationship between force, mass, and acceleration is given by this equation here, which is force equal to mass times acceleration. So that's our equation there. Force is equal to mass times acceleration. So the resultant force on a body with a constant mass is actually directly proportional to the acceleration according to that is Newton's second law of motion. So the F in this equation represents the resultant force in newtons. The M there is the mass in kilograms, and the A represent our acceleration in meters per second squared. We can have an example. Now we can look at this example whereby we'll use this equation and apply it in order to get the acceleration of this car. So we can read this equation. Find the acceleration of the model car below. So here is our diagram for that model car. So there are some forces which are acting on that model car. So one of the forces is that 18 newtons. So this 18 newtons is actually acting. So this 18 newtons here So this 18 newtons is actually acting in that direction. And then we have another force which is 10 newtons, which is an opposing force. So it's what we call frictional force acting there. And this one is the force due to the motor of that model car. And we're also given the mass. So we're given that mass. The mass of this model is actually 2 kilograms. So now, looking at the question, we're supposed to find the acceleration of this model car. So we have to find the acceleration. So now we know our relationship between the force, the mass, and the acceleration. So the force is equal to the mass multiplied by the acceleration. But it's the resultant force we are interested in, because there are two forces which are acting in opposite directions. So we are interested in the resultant force. So in order to calculate the resultant force here, we can say 18 newtons minus 10 newtons, because the forward force is actually 18 newtons. The opposing force is 10 newtons. So our resultant force will be 18 minus 10, which is equal to 8 newtons. So that's our resultant force. Then now, if we know the resultant force on this model car, then we can easily work out the acceleration. So we use our equations here. Force is equal to mass times acceleration. Then in this equation, because we want to get the acceleration, so we will make A the subject of this equation. So we are going to get acceleration is equal to force divided by the mass. The force divided by the mass. Again, we have calculated the force, which is the resultant force. It's our 8 newtons here divided by 2 kilograms. So we say 8 newtons divided by the mass of this model, which is 2 kilograms. As a result, we can get that acceleration 8 divided by 2. It will be 4 meters per second squared. So that's how we can get our acceleration here. Again, we are using this equation, which we call Newton's second law of motion. The force is equal to the mass multiplied by the acceleration. Then now we can move on and look at friction. So what we call friction. So before we can study friction, so what you have to know is that a single force cannot exist by itself. So forces always occur in pairs. So you cannot just have a single force acting on a body. So the forces which are actually acting on a particular body, always they occur in pairs. So we always talk about a pair of forces acting on a body. So for instance, in these diagrams here, so the first diagram here, it's that person there trying to run. So there are two forces which we observe there. So one is what we call the frictional force, and we are still going to state what do we mean by the frictional force. Another force is actually the force which is applied by the feet on the ground in that direction. Then now, according to the third law of motion here, so we say if an object A exerts a force on an object B, then object B exerts an equal but opposite force on object A. So that's the pair of forces. So if body A is actually exerting a force on another body B, then B is still going to exert another force which is opposite to the force which is actually exerted by body A on B there. So that's the third law of motion here. Then what is friction? So now, when looking at friction, we can say friction here is a force that opposes sliding motion. So when we have sliding motion, so between those two sliding surfaces, there will be what we call a force of friction. So it tries to oppose that sliding motion. For instance, if you are actually rubbing your hands together, so between your hands there will be that friction there. So as the hands slide over, the hands are actually sliding over each other. Between those two hands, there will be what friction there. So we can once again consider our first diagram here, which actually shows that person who is actually running. So in this case, we have the frictional force here, which is actually acting in that direction there. So that's our frictional force. So it's forward. like that. So as the person runs, so the person will exert a backward force. So the toes there are going to exert a backward force on the ground, and then the friction will be opposing that, so that that person is now able to run forward. Similarly, in the second diagram there, looking at friction there, so this guy here is actually pulling this load. So pulling that load there, actually on the surface there will be what friction there, which is actually opposing that force which is actually applied to pull that load. And in the third diagram, this guy here is actually pushing this load forward. So pushing that load, again, there will be friction which is actually opposing that sliding motion. So friction is nothing but a force that opposes sliding motion. Then now you find that in most cases we would like to reduce the friction. Then how do we reduce friction? So we can say here, to reduce friction, one can apply oil or grease in order to make the moving surfaces slippery. So applying oil between the surfaces so makes those two surfaces slippery, so that there is actually very little friction between those two surfaces. Also using roller bearings or wheels which are mounted between the surfaces. So wheels between the two surfaces makes or reduce the friction greatly there. So if for example, if we can look at a trolley usually have those wheels, so that there is little friction between the wheels and actually the floor there when pushing that trolley. So it makes that usage of the trolley to be very, very easy. Just imagine when there are no wheels, so it will be difficult for us to push that trolley when there are no wheels, because there will be a lot of friction. So wheels actually reduce friction greatly there. Then what are the disadvantages of friction? So what are the disadvantages of friction? So one disadvantage we have here is that friction, we can say friction cause moving parts of machinery to tear up. So moving parts of machinery can tear up due to friction. So, and also there is what we call or we can say friction causes loss of energy in the form of heat. So that's one disadvantage of friction. So in most cases you find that in machinery we have to keep on replacing some parts, especially those moving parts. As they rub against each other, they then tear up, and at the end of the day you have to replace those parts by bringing in new parts because of friction there. So friction is actually a problem when it comes to that. Then but looking at friction once again, we have stated one disadvantage of friction, so we can move on to look at the advantages. What are the advantages of friction? Right, when looking at friction, we can say one advantage of friction, we can say friction has an advantage because it gives shoes, tires, and tires grip on the ground and is used in most braking systems. So friction has an advantage because it gives shoes and tires a grip on the ground there. So for us to be able to move, for tires to be able to roll freely on the road there, it's because of friction. So they can easily grip, or we can say the friction gives those tires a grip on the ground. So movement is actually possible because of friction. So we can say here, without friction, walking, running, and gripping will not be possible. So without friction, walking, running, and gripping will not be possible, because if you are trying to grip a slippery surface, it won't be possible for you to be able to grip if the surface is actually slippery. So friction is actually very, very important for us to be able to walk around and even to run. We run because there is friction between our shoes and the ground. Right, now we can move on and look at moments. We can look at moments. So, and then first thing we have to note here, you find that it's sometimes difficult when you are trying to tighten a nut using your hand. So it becomes difficult when using your fingers to tighten a nut. But if you are using a spanner there, we find that that spanner is going to produce a greater turning effect. So you have to understand why this is the case. So we can say here, it is difficult. So it is difficult to tighten a nut with our fingers, but using a spanner that can produce a larger turning effect. So what do we mean by a moment of a force? So by the moment of a force, or the turning effect of a force, we call it the moment of a force. So the turning effect of a force is called the moment of a force, or we can say the moment of a force is actually the measure of its turning effect. So that's what we have here. So the turning effect of a force is called the moment of a force. Then now, calculating moments. So if we can find that we have an equation which we use in order to calculate the moment of a given force. So we can calculate moments by using this equation here. So we can say the moment of a force is actually calculated as a moment of a force that's equal to the force multiplied by the perpendicular distance from the pivot. So the moment of a force is equal to the force multiplied by the perpendicular distance from the pivot. Again, by the pivot, we mean a central point on that rotating object, a central point, or we can say maybe it's like the center of rotation. That's a pivot when looking at moment. So the equation, we can write it using symbols. So here is our equation. So its moment is equal to F times D. So again, the F there is the force, and the D there is the perpendicular distance from the pivot there. So looking at the direction of the moment, so we can say moments can be described as clockwise or anti-clockwise. So we can have a moment which is clockwise, and we can have a moment which is anti-clockwise, depending on the direction of that moment which is produced by the force on that object there. So we can say here moments are described as clockwise or anti-clockwise depending on their direction. And then the unit for moments, so we normally use that unit Newton meter. Newton meter, again it's capital letter M with small letter M there. That's the symbol Newton meter there. But sometimes we can use Newton centimeters, more especially if our perpendicular distance is in centimeters. So we can use maybe a Newton centimeters, but the standard unit for a moment of a force is that Newton meter. Then now we can look at these diagrams here. So in these diagrams, the first diagram, it's a spanner which is actually used to actually turn or to tighten that nut there. So we can have our pivot at the center there of that nut. So now we have just said there are two directions we looked at for the moment of a force. There is what we call a clockwise and an anti-clockwise moment. So if we look at this force, so the force is actually applied at the end of the spanner there in that direction. So does this force produce a clockwise or an anti-clockwise moment? So if we look at that direction, so this force will cause the spanner to rotate in that direction. So what direction is that? So looking at your clock face, so you can see that this direction is actually a clockwise direction. So this force here is actually producing a clockwise turning effect or a clockwise moment on that a nut there. Similarly, in the second diagram here, we have this beam which is actually pivoted at that point there. So that's where our pivot is. So there are two forces which are applied on either side. So there is this force 50 newtons and there is this force which is 80 newtons on the other side. So looking at the 50 newton force here, so it causes a clockwise moment because this force will cause the beam to rotate in that direction which is clockwise. And applying the 80 newton force here on the beam, it causes the beam to rotate in that anti-clockwise direction. So it will produce an anti-clockwise moment on that beam there. Then now we can have an example. We can look at an example because we have just talked about an equation we can use to calculate the moment of a force. So here is our example. So it's use the figure below to calculate the moment of the 10 Newton force about the pivot and explain how that moment can be increased. So in this case, that spanner there, we're applying that force 10 newtons at the end, and how far is that force from the pivot? So our pivot is at the center of the nut, so we have that distance there, which is 15 centimeters. So now we can calculate the moment of the 10 Newton force. So our equation is here. Moment is equal to force times perpendicular distance. Then the force, we can substitute. The force is 10 newtons. Then the perpendicular distance is 0.15 meters. So if we want to express the moment in Newton meters, we have to convert 15 centimeters to meters. So it's 0.15 meters. As a result, multiplying the two, 10 newtons multiplied by 0.15, you get that moment, which is 1.5 Newton meters there. So that's how we calculate the moment of this force. Then the second part of this question or this example is that how can you increase the moment of this force? There are two ways of increasing the moment of this force. So one way of increasing the moment of a force is by increasing that force from 10 newtons to a larger value. So if you apply a larger force, then once again the moment of this force is going to actually increase. Another way of increasing the moment is by increasing the perpendicular distance from the pivot. So if you increase the length of the spanner, so using a longer spanner there will also increase the moment of this force. Now we can look at a question. Or before we look at the question, we can look at the principle of moments. So the principle of moments here we can say at equilibrium, the sum of the clockwise moments about a pivot must be equal to the sum of the anti-clockwise moments about that pivot. So in this case, we have this beam, which is actually uniform. So it's pivoted there. So there are two distances. So there is a force F2 and there is a force F1, which is applied on either side of the beam. F2 is a distance d2 away from the pivot, and F1 is a distance d1 away from the pivot. So what we are saying here is that the clockwise moment must be equal to the anti-clockwise moment if this beam is at equilibrium or if this beam balances. So we can say if the beam above is at equilibrium, then F1 d1 must be equal to F2 d2. So meaning that when you calculate that clockwise moment, that is that anti-clockwise moment, that anti-clockwise moment should be equal to the moment this side, which is F2 multiplied by d2. So there is no net moment for a body which is actually at equilibrium. So now we can move on and look at this example here. So we are calculating the force F. So we are calculating the force F in this diagram. So there are two forces, 5 this side and F that side. So how do you get the force F? So if this beam is at equilibrium, so we can say F1 d1 is equal to F2 d2. So we can say F times 0.25 is equal to 5 newtons times 0.5. As a result, we can get our F here, which is equal to 10 newtons. So we can quickly recap what we've just done here in this lesson here. So the first thing we've looked at is that all objects resist change in motion due to inertia there, and we have stated that friction is actually a force which is it's a force which opposes relatively sliding motion there. Then we have that relationship F is equal to ma, which we used to calculate the resultant force. So the resultant force is the mass times the acceleration, and we looked at moments and say moment of a force will be the force multiplied by the distance, and moment is actually the measure of the turning effect of the force, and we have just stated that there is no net moment for a body which is at equilibrium. So that actually brings us to the end of our lesson today. Thank you very much for watching. Once again, I hope you did enjoy this physics lesson.
Yes, so we hope that they actually enjoyed their lesson. Maybe just to squeeze in a question from one of your learners.
Yes.
What is the difference between constant speed and constant acceleration?
All right. So basically, there is a difference between speed and acceleration. So when when looking at speed, we say speed is actually the distance covered by the body per unit time, while acceleration is actually the change in speed per unit time. So if the speed is constant, it means that that body is moving with a speed which is not actually changing. But when looking at constant acceleration there, so we mean that the rate at which the speed of the body changes is actually constant, is not actually changing. It means that, in fact, it means that that speed or the rate of change of the speed of that body is actually not changing. So that's a constant acceleration. So there is a difference between speed and acceleration. I hope that one is clear there. So you must first understand the difference between speed and acceleration. So by speed, we mean that the distance covered by the body per unit time. By acceleration, we mean the change in speed of the body per second or per unit time.
All right, thank you for that, Patrick, and we hope that the viewer back at home was actually answered. Thank you so much for your lesson. We'll see you again very soon, I'm hoping.
Once again, thank you so much. Definitely will see me again.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much, viewers at home. Please do not go anywhere. Lerato and myself will be right back after this.
Why is hand washing with soap effective against COVID-19? The coronavirus is too small to see, but is covered with little spikes that stick tightly to the natural greases on your skin. It gets on your skin by someone with COVID-19 coughing or sneezing nearby you, or by you touching an unclean surface where the virus can stay active for up to several days. But washing hands thoroughly with soap for 20 seconds is highly effective against the virus. Soap loosens the grip of the virus on the skin and destroys the outer layer of the virus, pulling it apart. This means the virus loses its power to infect people. Washing your hands well with soap means you can destroy or remove the virus and wash it away before it has the chance to infect you or your family. By washing hands with soap and water, people protect themselves, their loved ones, family, and the community. By acting together, we can help stop the spread of coronavirus.
Welcome back to our viewers. That was the last lesson for today on a very beautiful Thursday afternoon. How was your day?
My day was fantastic, as always.
As always. The days are getting more fantastic.
They are getting more fantastic.
All right, tomorrow is a Friday. Let's end the week off with a bang. And this is what your Friday looks like. Grade 7s, Form 3s, and Form 5s. From 2 p.m. until 2:30 p.m., we have English language for the grade 7s. From 2:30 p.m. until 3:08 p.m., we have religious education for the Form 3s. From 3:08 p.m. until 3:45 p.m., we have science for the Form 3s. Then from 3:45 p.m. until 4:25 p.m., we have biology for the Form 5s. And the last lesson for the Friday, from 4:25 p.m. until 5 p.m., is mathematics for the Form 5s.
Well, we also have social media platforms, which are YouTube and Facebook, where we are live from 2 p.m. until 5 p.m. Do not forget to click that subscribe button so that whenever we are live, you get a notification. We also have a WhatsApp number where you can send questions which are as relevant as possible.
Yes, with that said, with that WhatsApp number, of course, please use it to text us questions that you might have for that lesson that is being taught at the time. Please do not call us. Your calls are still coming through, guys. We're not going to answer. Please text us questions. Do not send us any audios.
Well, without wasting any time, we off. We're hoping that you guys had a fantastic day. We had a fantastic day with you guys.
We will see you guys tomorrow. Thank you for tuning in at 2 p.m. sharp. We are back. See you guys tomorrow. Stay safe. Be warm. It's very, very cold. We'll see you guys tomorrow.
Bye, guys.
Bye.